tests were conducted on the ordinary dust from several households across the U.S.
In '05, our family was involved in the dust study, where we gathered all the dust within our home from our vacuum cleaners and submitted it in, I think it was with 10 other families in Massachusetts, and we just waited for the results to see what was actually in our dust that came from household products in our home.
Jacob has fairly significant asthma, which has got my wife and me thinking about, environmental hazards early on.
We found out that there were many toxins and chemicals within our dust in our home. These are things that we expose ourselves to every single day, and dust that we breathe in all the time.
We often think that our homes are safe refuges for our children. In fact, there are many chemicals found in common household products that turn out to be developmental toxins. One of the chemicals that we're concerned with, for example, are phthalates, which are used to soften vinyl. Those will be found in children's toys and shower curtains, on our kitchen floors and wallpaper. Another chemical of concern is bisphenol A, which is used as a plasticizer in polycarbonate plastic, also commonly found in the kitchen in the form of infant baby bottles and water bottles that we might take out on a bike trip. Another chemical would be the brominated flame retardants. These are used in our computer screens and our television sets and our mattresses. So very common products that seem to be benign and friendly, like the curtains and our beds.
I did find myself getting angry when I looked through the report, in part because I felt helpless. I never thought about flame retardants. I never thought about the stain-resistant pants and shirts that everyone is so keen on these days, and the chemistry that's behind those sort of wonderful innovations.
What's showing up in household dust is also showing up in our bodies. Toxic chemicals are absorbed through our skin, breathed into our lungs, and digested through our water and food. Groundbreaking tests have found the same chemicals in people's blood, hair, and urine. One of the earliest families tested was the family of Michelle Hammond Holland and her husband, Jeremiah. The highest levels in the family were found in their young son, Rowan.
Rowan was tested as having the highest PBDE amounts of anyone who had ever been tested for the chemical. So a little 18-month-old boy had the highest levels, higher than anyone else in the family.
The family was shocked by what they found. The results of Rowan's test also created a stir in the media and in the scientific community. What they eventually learned was that these striking differences in test results for adults and children were not unique to Rowan. For a number of reasons, infants and youngsters up to age 4 have much higher levels of many problem chemicals in their bodies than adults do. And scientists have begun to pin down the causes.
First of all, children have greater exposure pound for pound than adults. They eat more food, they drink more water, they breathe more air per pound of body weight. So they take into their body more of any toxic chemicals that are in food, air, and water. And then on top of that, kids' exposure is further magnified because they live on the floor, they crawl around a few inches above the rug, they're constantly putting their hands, their toys, their lollipops in their mouths, and so all of those factors increase their exposure. They're biologically more vulnerable than we adults. Their nervous system, their reproductive organs, their immune system, their lungs, all the organs in their body are undergoing very, very rapid growth and development. And those developmental processes are very fragile, they're very easily upset, and unfortunately, if development is perturbed at a vulnerable early stage by some chemical like lead or pesticides or PCB, the damage in many cases is irreparable. It can't be cured, it can't be treated, it results in lifelong impairment.
Research at the University of Florida highlights how exposure to one group of chemicals, pesticides, may affect exposed children.
When I was put in contact with this area where a Native American tribe had split philosophically over the use of pesticides, with some remaining in an agricultural area, going into commercial farming, the other bit of the tribe moving to the foothills, refusing to use pesticides, and yet culturally, dietarily, genetically, in every way they were identical.
These were the same chemicals that we find in the United States and other places of the world to control insects and weeds.
When asked to draw a stick figure, the exposed children were not able to. They'd look at me and look at the paper and maybe draw a scribble at age 4, at age 5. Many put a circle at the bottom of the paper and went upwards. And in every case, the exposed children failed to live up to the standards of the lesser exposed children.
Scientists are finding that even a single tiny exposure during a critical phase of fetal development may permanently impair the health and well-being of the future child. They are that vulnerable.
For embryos, fetuses, and newborns, they're exquisitely vulnerable to the most vanishingly small toxic exposure. Because what the science is showing us is it's not just the dose that makes the poison, it's also the timing that makes the poison. And there are times in all of our lives, especially in the early part of it, in infancy and prenatal life, where some physiological or anatomical event is kind of unfolding.
Some groups in our society have higher levels of exposure and higher disease levels than others. For instance, the factory workers who make the products we use and people who work with potentially harmful chemicals on the job are typically exposed to far higher levels than the general population, and their health suffers as a result. And then there are the people who live nearest to where the chemicals and toxic products are manufactured. More often than not, these are communities of color or low-income neighborhoods. They are exposed to some of the highest levels of pollution, and health in these communities is also hurting, with heightened asthma, certain cancers, and other illnesses.
Highest rate of asthma, respiratory infection, cancer, also has the highest part of lead. And it's really an unhealthy community where I live at, because we live in an industrial part. And in 20 blocks long, we got 17 industries right within the neighborhood. We have 600 children that live in that community, 1,600 people. We're fighting not for us, because we already, whatever damage is done to us is already done. We're fighting for the children.
In 2007, 35 volunteers from 7 states were medically tested for contamination with 3 types of toxic chemicals. These 3 industrial chemicals were found in the blood or urine of every single person tested.
As a physician, I am very concerned about the rise in chronic diseases in this country. We know now that 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their lifetimes. Breast cancer is going to affect 1 in 8 women, prostate cancer 1 in 5 men. We know that diseases like diabetes and obesity, certain autoimmune diseases like lupus are on the rise. We really have to consider the role of chemical exposures in this rise in chronic disease.
In 2004, the Environmental Working Group obtained 10 cord blood samples from the American Red Cross. Cord blood is the blood that goes from the mom through the umbilical cord to the developing fetus.
We tested the 10 cord blood samples for chemicals from 9 different classes, including mercury, PAHs, PCBs, PFCs, and organochlorine pesticides. And we found over 200 chemicals across all 10 samples. I think before our study came out, a lot of people thought that the placenta protected the developing fetus. In essence, they thought that although the mother might be exposed to different chemicals, the fetus would be protected. I think our study definitively showed that this is not the case. Many of these chemicals are found commonly in consumer goods. Many of the chemicals that we found in the cord blood have been associated with cancers, different other types of chronic diseases.
Many chemicals that have been designed and used over the years have ended up in places where they weren't expected. They've ended up in breast milk, they've ended up in children's umbilical cord blood, they've ended up in wildlife. They weren't expected to be there. When that happens, that means that chemical is behaving in ways that wasn't anticipated, and we should at that point reverse course rather than continuing to plow ahead, waiting for evidence of proof of harm before we decide to change course.
This is really a social and political problem, and we need, if any chemical is toxic and known to accumulate in umbilical cord, blood, or mother's milk, it really has no place in our economy.
I know that there are other countries, European countries, where their government actually work to protect them. That's the standard that I would like our Massachusetts government to reach.
Fortunately, action is being taken to bring safer chemicals to the market, in legislative chambers around the world, in the laboratory, and in the business community. For instance, Europe banned 1,100 chemicals linked to cancer and birth defects from cosmetics, and is requiring chemical companies to safety test their chemicals in an initiative known as REACH. In the U.S., some companies are following the lead of Europe and eliminating chemicals banned in the EU from products sold in the U.S., even though they're not required to do so under U.S. law. In fact, hundreds of companies have signed the Compact for Safe Cosmetics to provide at least the same protection in the U.S. as in Europe. And then there are some promising new developments in laboratories. Green chemistry.
Why not come up with alternatives to mercury? Why not come up with alternatives to the hazards? To design at the molecular level, just as an architect designs a building, we can design molecules to do what we want them to do. We don't have to have toxic materials. Green chemistry is the science of how to make materials that society depends on in an environmentally responsible way. That's basically what it is how do you make a molecule and have that molecule do all the things you want it to do and not hurt the environment.
As consumers become more aware of the need for safer materials, companies that offer non-toxic products are benefiting financially. Safer materials are helping to enhance the bottom line in sectors as diverse as clothing, food, and cosmetics.
There is a moral component to this, absolutely. The golden rule applies here in terms of doing on others as you would have them do unto you.
I think that it's the responsibility of our government to protect us, but in many cases like this, not knowing what our household products are really made up of, when we find this information out, we do need to go the extra mile and take the next steps to hold our government responsible and hold the corporations responsible. We learned how to try to protect ourselves and which products to avoid. Products that have large or extreme fragrances, those are probably unhealthy for you. There's actually a website that we refer people to so that you can try to see if the products that you're using from the companies that you might buy them from are safe or not.
Try as we might, we can't just shop our way out of this problem, as we are surrounded by these chemicals in our economy. We also need to pass laws to put safer alternatives into practice, and citizens are just beginning to press for these new laws across America.
The chemicals are definitely everywhere within our home, from our bathrooms to our bedrooms. I don't want to think it's hopeless. I think we have to continue the fight. So it only makes sense to provide safer alternatives for us.
It's good for consumers, it's good for manufacturers, it's good for the environment. It's all around a win-win-win solution.